Adam, I'm excited to talk with you today. We first met at the University of Utah almost 10 years ago. Later,
Wow.
we met up at a conference in Atlanta, and my wife and I still have great memories of visiting with you in your office at Columbia a few years back. You're an inspiration to so many, both inside our field and outside of it. So, thanks so much for sharing a few minutes with me today.
It's my pleasure. It's great to be here today.
Well, you've had an incredible academic career as a professor, researcher, consultant, and then even as an expert witness and documentary film producer. And as you think back on your career, are there two to three simple, practical, underappreciated lessons you've learned that you'd most like to pass along to others?
Yeah, I was thinking that, you sent me this prompt in advance, so I had some time to think on it and reflect on it and percolate on it. And I have a couple. The first one is kind of a simple idea, but the lesson is everything is difficult the first time you do it. It doesn't matter what it is, right? The first time you write a paper, it's really hard to do. The first time you give a talk, it's really hard to do. The first time you change a diaper, right? It's really hard to do, and so I think some people go and experience something and say, that was difficult, I'm not good at it. But that's not true. You don't know if you're good at it yet. You just done it the first time. And so I think that one of the things I think is really important is that once we recognize that the first time we do something, or even the first few times we do something, it's always going to be difficult for almost everybody, then we don't judge ourselves. We don't also exclude ourselves from those activities, right? Because we realize it's going to take some time and some practice. And here's the simplest version of it. I worked out this morning with a personal trainer, and she did a new exercise this morning that I'd never done before. And the first time we did it, I was like, this feels impossible to me. Like I can't bend my body the way she's telling it. Like it literally doesn't make any sense. And I'm just thinking, okay. But then by the time the second time we did it, I did it pretty well. And then we always do acro exercises 3 times. By the third time, I was like, okay, I can do this. So that's just like the simplest version of it, right? Like my first reaction was, I can't do this. It's like my body doesn't work this way. But then I remembered this always happens to me when I work out in a new exercise, right? And so part of it is that once you become aware of that, right, it doesn't have to be stressful. It doesn't have to be anxiety producing. You just recognize that what you need is practice and experience. And so I'm going to give you actually two broad themes, but two sub themes. So the second theme related to everything is difficult the first time you do it is just the value of experience and practice. Bill Simmons, who's a sports writer, always had this famous phrase talking about reps. You just want reps, right? Kobe Bryant was horrible in the first 3 playoff series that he was in, but he played in 28 playoff games. He got reps in these high stakes situations. So then in year 4, he hit a game winner, right? And became like Michael Jordan essentially in that period of time. And so part of it is that we develop skills through practice and experience. So here's what I would tell you to do. Everything is difficult the first time you do it. You get better through practice and experience, but also remember to use that experience to build confidence. So experience builds competence, but you also want to remember to recognize that so that it can build your confidence. And once you recognize that, when things are difficult the first time, it won't be stressful. You'll just say to yourself, oh, I need more practice. I need more experience.
I love these lessons. It makes me think back to when I was a child, my mom had a brain tumor, which also caused a stroke, and she had to learn how to talk again, and she had to learn how to eat again. And I remember as a kid watching her try to lift the fork to her mouth, and it's like she had to relearn that. But what's funny is if you're right-handed and you try to eat left-handed, it like reinforces the same notion of how things that we take for granted as being so simple, like raising our hand to our mouth, is actually kind of difficult when we haven't practiced it. And it's surprising how often we forget this when we try a new challenge. It's like we can't even write left-handed because we don't have much practice with it. But if we're kind of having a difficult time at our job, we think we're not capable, and we forget that it just takes these reps. And it's funny you mentioned Kobe Bryant. I remember when Kobe came into the league, there was so much excitement around him. And I don't know if it was his first playoff series or if it was a game to get into the playoffs, but my memory
Airballs,
is what?
airballs. He shot a
Yes,
bunch of airballs.
air balls at the end of
Yes.
the game. And I thought, oh my
Yep.
gosh, this high school kid,
Yeah.
like he's never going to make it. And I had such a short-sighted view at that moment. Like, this is crushing. This is the end of his career. And I just remember feeling so bad for him airballing the biggest shots of his life.
Yeah.
But that was just the beginning.
Yeah,
So
it wasn't just one airball. He had multiple airballs, right? And so
yes,
that's the thing.
yes.
Um,
So I love these lessons.
and then I think, so the first lesson, right, is this idea. The second lesson, and, is that you got to really sort of figure out your style, right? And who you are and how you interact in the world. And maybe this is a bigger thing when you're a faculty member and you're teaching and you're in front of people and you have to like learn a style. But like, when I was started out at the Kellogg School of Management over 20 years ago, I was given a teaching mentor named Brian Utsi, who's an amazing teacher, multiple award-winning teacher. And he had a very specific style where he'd kind of stand here like this and he would talk like this. Mm-hmm. And so I was like, okay, I don't know how to teach. So the first year I taught, I would try to stand here like this and talk like this. And it was, a disaster. And then over years, I developed, my style, which is more animated, for example, and I move around a lot and I use my arms and I think about modulating my voice. And then about 8 years after that, Lauren Nordgren became an assistant. He's now a full professor at Kellogg, but he was a first-year assistant professor. And I was assigned to be his teaching mentor, and he was supposed to sit on my class every week. And what I said to him is, look, there's 4 people teaching this class. I want you to sit on my class every morning, but I want you to sit on another person's class every afternoon. So when Brian does social networks, sit on his class. When Vicki Medvick does decision-making, sit on her class. When Kathy Phillips does teams, sit on her class. And he said it was remarkable because he realized that all 4 of us had won teaching awards. All 4 of us were really good teachers, but we were unbelievably different in the classroom. Like we were completely different. Like if you looked at it, you'd be like, these are not even within the same ballpark. They're not even the same sport. Right. And so I think that that was really refreshing to me, just a reminding that people have to figure out what works for them. I remember hearing, I've tried to look it up, I can't find it, but I remember hearing about a study about looking at who were the best lawyers during closing arguments and what was the best style. And they basically figured out there wasn't the best style. It was the style that worked for each lawyer. Some were methodical, going, point by point through the case. Some people were flourishes with imagined scenarios. It was what worked for you to present. Now, this corollary of this, right? So the first one was everything's difficult the first time. And the corollary, right, is that we can, build competence and confidence through our experience. This one is know your style. But the corollary of that is that you also need to create the conditions that help you succeed and know your style. So earlier, Nate said, you think, oh, I'm not competent. I'm not good at this job. And, could be that's true. Could be it's not a good fit for you. And so the question is, what is or maybe you haven't had enough practice, right? But let's say you've had enough practice, but maybe it's actually, you're just not in the right version of that task, right? And so I'll just give you an example from my life. I graduated from Harvard undergrad. I got a job at Mass General Hospital. It was doing a 9-to-5 job. And that's just not who I am as a person. When I was in college undergrad, I couldn't even get up for a 10 a.m. class. My earliest classes were 11 a.m., and I got fired after 3 months, and then I got hired as a research assistant at Harvard, where I had a very flexible schedule. And I could, work at night if I wanted to, or come in at 11. And Sundays, the professor would say, I need you at 9. And I'd come in on those days at 9. And I really succeeded. Then I got into grad school at Princeton. And, as Nate said, I've been very successful. I don't know how successful I'd be if I had a very strict 9-to-5 schedule where my time was regimented, but I've been very lucky. I'm very privileged, but I've found a schedule that works for me and who I am as a human being. And so part of it is finding, the conditions that work for you. Just one other example of this is that, I published over 200 articles in my life. I've never published a solo authored paper. Right.
Oh,
that's
wow.
just not who I am as a person. I like collaborating with people. So if I were in a field where all my work had to be done solo authored, I wouldn't be as successful because I build with ideas of other people. I get energy from other people. I get insights by interacting with other people. And so a lot of my, I'm a great mentor, right? But I benefit personally from being a mentor. It's not just that I'm helping the student, that's giving me energy and making my ideas better and making my publications better. So I've been just very fortunate that I've created a world where collaboration is valued and I have a flexible schedule.
Yeah, I love this lesson, and it's funny to hear that teaching story because one of the first classes I taught, I thought, professors have to be very kind of professional and have to look the part, and so I wore a suit and a tie to every class, and I felt like an idiot because the students are rolling out of bed at 8 a.m. and they're in sweats, but I was thinking, I have to be professional, and those were the lowest teacher ratings I ever got. And kind of before that class and after that class, I just was more myself. Like
Yeah.
business casual is more kind of my style, and I've done much better since then. Um, and then I love this idea of like you got to find the style that works for you. I think of football coaching, and I think of the Bill Belichick, Nick Saban. Like that's a style, hard nosed, kind of in your face, intense. But there's also the Pete Carroll style, which
Yep.
is the players coach, and
Yep.
that works for Pete. So there is no necessarily one right way. We've got to find what works for
Yep.
us. And then lastly, I'm happy to hear that you got fired from a job. I also got fired from a job once, and I was this was during college, and when I was doing a really poor job at the job, obviously, and they called me in and told me they were firing me. And I was happy because I was hating the job, and they were like, this is really going to affect you in your life. And I was like, no, I'll be fine. And the person firing me was upset that I wasn't upset. But it sounds like I'm in good company, so happy to hear that you got fired once as well.
Yeah, and let me just say two things. One about the suit and the attire, right? So when I taught at Kellogg for 12 years. I never wore a suit. I would wear a button down and often with a sweater, et cetera. And then I came to Columbia Business School, and everyone wore a suit in the classroom. And so like I would just it would have been awkward to not wear a suit.
Yeah.
Now, I never wore a tie, right? So it's like I still was able to be a little bit casual, but I started wearing a suit during, every time that I was doing that. And I just got interviewed by a reporter yesterday who turns out to also be a big Miami Dolphins fan, and they wanted to know to diagnose or dissect the leadership style of the new coach down there and why Tua has been so much more successful as a quarterback under this coach than he had been previously. So, and I think that's another great example of football, right? Like Justin Fields, right? When he went in the combines, he's a quarterback for the Chicago Bears. He was one of the most accurate people. He can't hit anyone. And then finally someone's like, could you just not putting him in a system that maximizes his chance of success? Once they put him in a system where they maximize his movement, now he's hitting people, downfield because he's in his comfort zone. So, that's a good example again of like, you got to, he's an accurate quarterback, but not in a traditional
Yeah.
step back 6 steps and throw the ball.
Yeah. Well, I love these lessons, Adam. Anything else you'd like to leave with us as we wrap up here?
No, I mean, it's all part of the same tapestry or fabric, right? Which is that like you need experience, but you need experience in the right conditions. You need to create those conditions, but to create those conditions, you also need to understand yourself, right? And then through all of that process, you're not trying to build competencies, but don't forget that to feel confident in the process. And so figure out you got this when you have that experience.
These are great lessons that I will share with my kids. I will share with my students. But they're great lessons for adults as well. And Adam, I just want to thank you for spending a few minutes with me today. You are one of the most productive humans on planet Earth, which also means you are one of the busiest. So I'm especially grateful you'd share these lessons with me today. Thanks so much for coming on.
Sure.